Dynamic blocks explained. Terraform resources often contain repeatable, nested blocks such as ingress rules or tags. Writing these blocks manually duplicates configuration and increases the risk of inconsistent parameters. A dynamic block allows Terraform to generate nested blocks from structured input. Terraform evaluates the input collection and expands one nested block per element. You shift the unit of work from writing lines of code to managing the data that drives them. Nested blocks normally require explicit repetition inside the resource. Each ingress rule must be written as a separate block with identical structure. The configuration grows linearly with the number of rules. Manual repetition creates maintenance step where a single security policy change requires multiple manual edits, inviting human error. A dynamic block requires a collection that describes each nested block instance. Terraform iterates over the collection to generate the nested configuration. Each element becomes the source of values for the generated block. Infrastructure behavior becomes parameterized through structured input instead of repeated syntax. A dynamic block instructs Terraform to generate nested blocks from the collection. The for each argument iterates through each element. Terraform exposes the current element through an iterator object. Values inside the content block are populated from the iterator fields. Multiple ingress rules are produced from a single template. The iterator object represents the current element in the loop. Terraform names the iterator after the dynamic block label. The .value attribute exposes the element's fields. Each iteration populates the nested block with that element's data. The nested configuration becomes a projection of the input collection. Terraform expands dynamic blocks during configuration evaluation. The generated nested blocks become part of the final resource configuration before the plan graph is executed. Terraform's graph does not track how a block was authored. Once expanded, the provider receives the same exact API payload it would receive from manually written blocks. Dynamic blocks convert infrastructure definitions into templates driven by data. Adding a new ingress rule requires modifying the input structure rather than writing another block. Terraform regenerates the nested configuration from that structure during evaluation. Security policy and infrastructure structure remains synchronized through a single source of data. Dynamic blocks can only generate nested blocks defined by the provider schema. Terraform validates the configuration before the plan phase. If the provider schema does not define the block type, Terraform rejects the configuration. On a submarine, system consoles are isolated by strict interface boundaries. The sonar console cannot issue commands to the reactor control system because the interface contract forbids it. Terraform enforces the same discipline. Dynamic blocks can repeat an allowed structure, but they cannot invent new interfaces.